Okay, I think we're ready to go.
Let's call to order. All right. Morning, everyone. Luisi here from DEC Region 4. We are recording, so I think we can get started with introductions, and I'll start with board members. Myself, Tony Luisi. I see Elaine Chinian from Parks. Good morning. Stephen Rice, citizen member. Nancy Pearson, citizen member. Supervisor Peter Barber from the town of Guilderland. Sean McGuire from town of Colony. And I believe will the supervisor be joining us?
I believe so, but she's on quite a lap these last couple of weeks, so she might be fine. Understood.
All right, well, thank you. Jessica Otney Mahar from the Nature Conservancy. John Rust, citizen member. Mike McLaughlin from the County of Albany. And I know we have some guests and many staff with us, but if I missed anyone from the board level, I don't believe I did, but just call me out on that if I did. And Chris, I'll turn it to you to complete the intros for everyone else.
Okay, we'll wait till we get to the agenda where staff are going to speak. I think you got everybody.
No problem. So in the board packet that was circulated a few days ago, there were the minutes from the last meeting. Hopefully everyone had a chance to review those. Does anyone have any comments, or is there a need to discuss the proposed minutes from last meeting? Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
In a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, any opposed? Great, thank you, everyone. Next up, do we have any comments from the public? Richard?
Yeah, I'd like to give a report from the Friends of the Pine Bush.
All right, I think, Chris, is that, yeah, I don't think we have that later in the agenda, so.
Oh, we'll have, let's have Richard speak under comments from the public. That'd be great.
Go ahead, Rich.
Okay, thank you. I'm Richard Naylor. I was president and now I'm treasurer for the board of the Friends of the Pine Bush community. And I just thought to tell you what we've been up to in the last quarter. Under organizational infrastructure, we have two functioning committees now, a social outreach committee, which does things like environmental book reviews, hiking, leading people on hikes, and whatever creative things we can come up with. So that's something, we try to do something every month. Also, we now have a new software program that we've been able to purchase for $30 for the first year, which allows us to much more efficiently send emails, acknowledgements, reminders, and it's going to save staff a lot of time and probably help us with our goal this year of vastly increasing the number of friends that we've been able to reach. Two things on 3M grants. In 2019, we got a $3,000 grant for an erosion control system. They use geomat cells or geocell mats to protect special sand trail areas. They kind of fill up with sand and then the whole thing is covered. We couldn't do it in 2020, which was when it was supposed to be done because no one could be hired. And Jesse just finished installing them. I think he'll be probably telling us more about that later, but we're kind of excited to see how that works out. And finally, then we got another 3M grant this year, which was through Neil Gifford's help. And that involves 10 cellular tracking tags, nodes, GPS, and waterproof USB. They'll be tracking the eastern towhees while they're in the pine bush. Another neat thing that we've done. We applied for a CFA number. We didn't know what that was until we were at the Department of Transportation Health Fair, and somebody wanted to donate, but they wanted a CFA number. So now we have applied for that. in a sign of normalization, which is kind of cool. We did 3 tabling events so far this year. The first in August at Guilderland for the night out. Then we did the Colony Harvest Fest, and I just mentioned the DOT Health Fair. And finally, our 20-mile challenge is still going. We've had a kind of an ongoing number of people who fill out the forms, which means they've hiked every trail, all 20 miles of trails in the Pine Bush. And so we have 75 people with hiker badges. I'm sure there's other things that we've been doing, but I wanted to just kind of say hi again and let you know we're still working hard in the background. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. Any other comments from the public? If so, just raise your hand on Zoom and we'll unmute you, or you can unmute yourself if possible.
Nobody, Wendy?
All right. The next up on the agenda, reports. So I don't have a formal report, but this is the last board meeting of the calendar year. So similar to what I said back in September, I just want to commend the staff for a challenging year with respect to all of the various and ever-changing COVID restrictions and precautions that have been in place. We're not through it yet, but hopefully there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and we'll keep at it. So I just want to again commend Chris and the entire staff for all of the hard work in keeping the center open and delivering on the commission's mission, and keeping the foot traffic on the trails and indoors. And let's look forward to a productive new year. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Tony.
Hey, I'd like to say a little bit. It's Elaine.
Great.
So Governor Kathy Hochul announced recently the acquisition of the Big Bend area of Moreau Lake State Park. This is an 800-acre plus acquisition on the Hudson River, former French Pine lands. It's exciting. It was protected by the Open Space Institute a few years ago, and it took a while to transfer it to the state, but we're very excited that that transfer has happened. And I want to thank Chris, Neil, and others at the Pine Bush who have been supportive of that acquisition and are helping us to develop management strategies for the Karner Blue Butterfly to help with its federal recovery. And I continue to advocate with the agency that that is its primary purpose. So we'll see how that goes, but so far so good. Chris, I think this triggers re-engagement on the MOU process. So just want to let everybody know that that good news happened.
Thanks, Elaine.
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks, Elaine. Yeah, we're looking forward to helping out. It's a great project. Beautiful site.
Does anyone else from the board want to speak?
Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to second what Tony said. All of the staff and the volunteers have been doing such an amazing job. And I would mention that I went to one of the openings for the photo exhibit, and another great job was done by all the staff to keep everyone safe and actually have an event. So thank you to everyone.
Thanks, Nancy.
Chris and the rest of the board, I just wanted to let everyone know that Governor Hochul has proposed to increase the bond act that should appear on the November 2022 ballot, focused on the environment, of $4 billion. And it includes a lot of funding that would be wonderful for the Pine Bush and surrounding areas for things like habitat restoration and land acquisition. So it could really further the mission of this organization and many others. And likewise, a large coalition of organizations are pushing for an increase to the Environmental Protection Fund this year, which is the source of funding for the Albany Pine Bush Commission in the state budget. So I wanted to remind everyone that if you're part of a local government or a private organization that can engage in advocacy, I'm happy to chat with other members of the board to help you get involved in supporting those causes.
That's great. Thank you, Jess. That's
Jessica,
pretty exciting.
What is the number of the EPF that people are targeting?
So right now it's a $300 million appropriation, and the goal, which may be a long-term goal, is 500 million. And we have seen a lot of demand that is outstripping the appropriated dollars in categories throughout the EPF's 4 programs. So we're hoping that to augment other funding like the state's Clean Water Fund and the Bond Act, we can start to grow that fund again, particularly now as federal funding is coming in, so that the state is well positioned to leverage that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward. The governor's state of the state was announced. I think it's January 5th. Does that sound right, Jess? And so I would assume the budget comes out the week of the 17th or the following week.
Right.
One or the other. Good. January is always good. Well, January is always interesting in New York, right? In Albany. Any other board members? Okay. I'll keep it short. I want to make sure if you haven't already, please read through the update. This is what the staff put together based on the quarter, all the things, good highlights, lots of stuff going on. Certainly, we're still in the throes of this pandemic, but it's a little more normal, We got some more in-person programs. We're doing public programs, I should say. We're doing virtual programs. We continue to do that. Again, the staff have done an amazing job on jumping from in-person to a virtual platform, which is difficult as you see me struggle through these meetings. But school programs, again, over 500 participants from school programs in the last quarter. Almost 160 were in person. More still prefer virtual, but we are doing some in person. Lots of other stuff going on. The photo exhibit, Wendy had that scrolling as a slideshow in the beginning before everybody signed on. So this year, the photo exhibit, the Pine Bush Perspectives, it's typically here, and we have a grand opening here inside the Discovery Center, and then we have the exhibit in the Pine Barrens room. Last year, due to COVID, we had it all outside, like a story walk along the trail going up to the overlook here in Carter Barrens East. So this year, we tried a hybrid. So we had the opening event, but it was timed tickets. So we had 3 different groups that came in. We have the photos on the wall in the Discovery Center, but we also have them out on the ground. So if people aren't comfortable coming in, or the fact that the Discovery Center's still open only 4 out of 7 days of the week, people can still come and enjoy it. So it's pretty cool. And we've had a lot of good feedback on that. So there's 34 of those photos, and there was well over 100 submitted, 120 plus that were submitted. A couple other things. Take a look at the analytics for the website. Nearly 11,000 users between now or from September to December. Lots of neat stuff in conservation science, all about birds. The fall bird banding, 15 years. These are our electronic, the Motus towers that track birds. Read about that. Here's one just to point out. I always like these numbers. One of the northern saw-whet owls that Dylan banded in 2018 was captured this year in Minnesota, 958 miles away.
What?
And you can see how small those owls are. Fascinating. Carter numbers. Steve's going to give you a presentation on that. You'll hear about that. Fire. This was kind of fun. I participated in giving out Smokey Bear kit as a pickup, as a drive-through pickup. The education staff have done a number of these with COVID, and you can't believe the enthusiasm of these kids when they're in the car and they're Smokey. It's wonderful. I'm going to see if I can share this. A parent shared a photo that we posted on Facebook of her two little boys with these smoky masks on. That was part of the kit, and it was picked up by Channel 10. That's the most adorable thing. So kids are still having a lot of fun. Lots of other stuff in the update. Please go through it. We burned, today's Thursday, Tuesday, Tyler and his crew with lots of volunteers and some staff burned a little over 2 acres on Kings Road, brings us to 296 acres for the year. And it was only the second time in 30 years that we've conducted a prescribed burn here in the Pine Bush in December. So that's kind of fun news too. And finally, and I said I wasn't going to go through all this, but you know how I am. Staff's got a lot of stuff going on. We collected very, very little seed last year due to COVID and lack of volunteers and lack of seasonal staff. So Jesse and Joel and other volunteers and our staff helped collect lots and lots of seed. This is all bush clover and horse mint seed that's up in our loft in the barn and is drying. So we should be in good shape for next year. And we continue to do invasive work and mowing work, which preps us for fire in the spring. And with that, I will stop.
Hey, Chris, John here. I'm amazed that Smokey the Bear is still relevant, and it renews my faith in humanity, frankly.
Smokey Bear is yes. His message has turned from complete anti-fire and wildfire to preventing wildfires and the safe use of wildland fire, i.e. prescribed fire. And of course, kids love anything that looks like a big cartoon character that's dressed up. The person in the costume, not so much. But that was provided directly by DEC, and we had a forest ranger here, Tyler Mitchell. So that was great.
That's great.
It was fun. So, and thank you, John. And here's the technical committee summary that Neil was going to go through. Any questions? No. Neil, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Morning, everyone. Happy holidays. In front of you, you have all received the quarterly report from the technical committee. Activity continues to be relatively slow. Nothing new in the city of Albany. The city's habitat restoration project continues to chug along. This year was mostly maintenance of the habitat around the landfill and continuing with invasive species management there and plant and animal monitoring. The New York State DEC Region 4 wild biologist has retired. So I'm meeting Friday with Region 4 staff and the new diversity biologist and some other folks over there to bring them up to speed on the landfill habitat restoration project. It's all mitigation for the last expansion of the landfill. Looking forward to that meeting. Always enjoy meeting with Region 4 staff, good group of people. Looking at this town of Guilderland, no new projects in Guilderland that we reviewed. And I think there's the only relevant update for you all is at the very end of the Rapp Road residential development piece, which is the big project associated with Pyramid Corporation and Crossgates Mall. That project remains in litigation, but it looks like it's been somewhat expedited, and the town and the applicant were successful in defending the Article 78 that was brought about by Save the Pine Bush. Save the Pine Bush has since appealed, and the appellate division will be looking at that project on an expedited schedule, I believe later this winter. Supervisor Barber probably has more detail than what I shared if folks have questions about that project in particular. The town of Colony has been a little bit busier, but all of the projects have been relatively minor and really not likely to have any significant impact on our ability to create and manage the preserve. But there are 5 new projects in Colony that are listed here. Pretty much all of them, except for one, are in areas that were not recommended for any level of protection. So it's good. It's all 3 municipalities work with us very well, but Colony in particular is good about sending us projects to review, even when they're in non-protection areas, just to try and continue to build the sense of place for the pine bush and ensure that new development adjacent to the preserve is well balanced with our conservation needs and interests. I think I'll leave it at that unless folks have questions, but the details are there. And if you look at the bottom of every project, there should be usually the last sentence is italics, and that will give you the latest news on each project. If there are no questions, I will go back to mute.
Thank you, Neil.
Thanks, Neil. All right, next up, Lisa.
Holidays. Hope everybody has a safe and wonderful season. Here we go. Statement of financial activities on the revenue side. Dues and contributions are slightly higher, and this is due to our quarterly trust bill. Came in a little bit higher than we budgeted. It'll be a little bit higher for the end of the year. Government grants and contracts are 94% of budget, and this is directly related to the DC expenses below. We usually typically spend a little bit less in the first 6 months of the year. Mitigation fees are slightly under budget, and this is less tonnage from the landfill, direct tie to that. Lease revenue is on budget for the year, and other revenue is slightly higher than budget, and this is due to increased sales in our merchandise and our gift shop. Total revenue came in at 95% of budget through October, which is relates a little bit to the expenses below. We're a little bit under there too. Moving on to expenses, personnel and fringe are at 89% of budget through October. We did make a big benefit payment in November to the New York State retirement system, so this caught up a little bit there. We will be a little bit under for the year. We have a vacant position for the volunteer coordinator position and 2 less educational seasonals that we budgeted for. So it will be a little under. Travel and training is $14,000 under budget, and this is across various departments. We budgeted for some outside training. We're doing more Zoom due to COVID, taking advantage of DEC training as well, and less travel. Contractual is at 80% of budget through October. This is due to a lot of timing, DC projects, snow plowing, etc. We will be under a little bit in legal, and there's a science land cover contract that's coming in January due to timing. So that's just budgeted earlier in the year. Communication is $29,000 under budget. And again, this is due to timing. This will catch up in the last quarter. We have program booklets, volunteer recognition events. We will be a little bit under in community engagement just because of COVID. Again, marketing and promotion and that type of thing. Occupancy, this is $21,000 under budget. This is our budget center for the Discovery Center repairs and utilities. They usually increase through the winter months, the utilities, and this is based really on repair need. We're also only open 4 days, and we assumed we would be open 7. So that has a little impact on all of the expenses down through. Supplies and equipment are under budget. This is mainly due to equipment lease and maintenance. This is a placeholder for repairs for vehicles and equipment. We haven't needed all of that right now. Supplies are down across all departments, and this again, we're only open 4 days instead of 7. And other expenses are $9,300 under budget. The biggest variance here is marketing promotion. And again, we haven't hired the volunteer coordinator position, so this is down a little bit for the year. So total expenses came in at 84% of budget. Overall, revenue is 95%, expenses 84%, giving us our operating surplus. And this is what you would see on the net income statement on the audit of $259,000 through October on the cash side. So then if we look at capital expenditures are a little bit over. This is our security system, a little more expensive than we budgeted. Gives us our cash flow, $235,000. And if you look at the non-operating revenues, we do this separate. This is the number that ties into your Paris report. I know it's a lot of information, but I try to tie all these numbers into budget Paris report because they're designed a little bit differently. Depreciation expense is $161,000, a little bit more than we budgeted. We purchased 2 vehicles, a UTV and a slip-on unit at the end of last year, which increased that. Net gain on investments, which is a great thing, is $469,000 through October. So our total change in net position reflected in our audit, including these, would be $567,372. Our excess deficiencies, revenue over expenditures. This is our Paris number. This is the 5-year budget you're about to see. This includes balance sheet accounts. It includes capital expenditures, which do not show on your income statement, would be $543,000. And if you look over at the budget, it's negative $1.08 million, which ties into the 5-year. This includes the $820,000 for Opeb non-cash expense, and it includes the depreciation expense of $265,000. So we kind of show how we use our cash in the beginning, and down at the bottom, we tie that into our Paris budget, which includes our non-cash expense and capital expenditures on our balance sheet. So any questions on that? Okay. So onto our statement of net assets. Cash is higher in March, and this is great news. We got our 5-year contract with DEC approved. We received a $668,000 advance and our April through June payment. Grants receivable decreased due to a payment from DEC of the April through June, and currently grants receivable is 0. And this week, DEC made another payment in November. So this is all caught up. Accounts receivable decreased slightly, and this is just due to money for our internet. We share with TNC, and then they have paid that as well. This is 0. Inventory decreased slightly, and this is just due to gift shop sales and adjustments. Prepaid expenses are 0. This is the timing for year-end expenses. You'll see this on March 31st when we have prepaid expenses into our next fiscal year. Investments had a gain of $469,000 due to a positive performance in all 4 funds through October. Capital assets decreased $110,000. This is due to depreciation expense of $161,000. And then we had the security system of $24,000 and $51,000 total additional for capital. Deferred outflows from New York State retirement remained the same through October. We received reports and did an adjustment in November. So that will go up slightly to about $168,000, which is tied directly below to the New York State pension liability. So total assets increased $570,000 over last year due to an increase in cash and investments. Onto liabilities, not much to report here. $3,000 increase just due to accrued expenses through October. The rest remain the same, so total liabilities increased $3,000. Net assets, capital assets decreased $110,000 as and above due to depreciation expense of $161,000 and $51,000 in additions. $9,000 decrease in reserved assets, and this is the colony mitigation project that has been paid. Unreserved assets increased $686,000. So total net assets of $560,000 are made up of $259,000 operating surplus, $469,000 gain in investment, and $161,000 in depreciation. Any questions on that? Okay, on to investments. Great report here. Total gain was $469,000. The reserve fund gained $80,000. The Discovery Center Fund gained $11,000. The Endowment Fund gained $357,000. And the Opeb reserve account gained $20,000. Through November, there's a little bit of an adjustment, but the reserve fund and the Opeb reserve remained pretty stable. We lost about $48,000 in the endowment for November, but not a big number. So we're still at about a $400,000 gain through November, the end of November. Any questions on that? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
All right, and I think next up on the agenda, we have 6 action items, and we do have a quorum. First up is the next fiscal year's proposed annual plan. Chris, do you want to share some information with us about what that plan entails and includes?
Yep, absolutely. So this ties right into our budget, which we're going to look at in the next resolution. And it's similar to what it looks like typically every year. So I'm going to scroll through this. This is the clean annual plan. And then there's the red line that follows. And I'll show you some of the changes, point out the highlights, anything that's really significant. This is just talking about our land acquisition policy, making sure that we're following it. But here, this is important. So the current management plan that we have, we're functioning under the 2017 management update, which was adopted by the commission in March of 17. So our law, our enabling legislation requires that the commission review that management plan every 5 years and update it if necessary. So staff and the technical committee typically will work on that. So there'll be a recommendation at the March meeting where the commission directs the technical committee to work with the staff to go through that management plan and see if it needs a modest update, no update, or a significant update, and to report back at the September meeting and start the process if necessary. Scrolling through, some of these are just modest changes. This is in the budget. Remember a few years ago, we did a grounds planning project that was pretty extensive. So there's a grounds committee made up of staff here that's gone back and looked at some of those additions, those modifications, those improvements. Primarily, many of them have to do with safety issues, particularly the ingress and egress into the center and the parking lot and how the parking lot's designed. Then there's also been discussions, and I mentioned this at the last meeting in September, about looking at the part of the trail that leaves the Discovery Center here at the trailhead and goes to the overlook, the high point, and hardening that surface so it's more accessible for more people. So that's basically resulted in, we need to bring somebody back to help us work on this collectively with some expertise in landscape architecture to think about it. So that's in the annual plan. This also specifically here too is, Lisa mentioned that under personnel expenses, we're down because we haven't hired the outreach volunteer coordinator. That position has been vacant. And we purposely did that until we basically revamped the operating plan, it's been modified a number of times over the years since we did the strategic planning work with conservation impact, which you may remember a number of years ago. Instead of calling it an operating plan, we're calling it the Community Connections Initiative because it describes just what that is: making better connections with our communities and focusing on being more inclusive of people that represent the diversity in our communities. And that's what that person will help work on too. So you'll see that here. And then it also talks about the Community Connections Initiative here. And also in looking at how we advertise for that position, I've had a number of conversations with folks about recruitment and how language in your job descriptions can be attractive or unattractive to people in different types of different types of backgrounds from a diversity standpoint. So we're keeping that in mind. So that's kind of the high level summary of that, the annual plan for this year. And I can answer any questions folks might have. No? Okay.
If there are no questions, can we have a proposed resolution approving this update? Can we get a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Nancy, Elaine. Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Let's move on to action item number 2, or B, the operating budget and the 5-year Paris budget.
Okay, so these tie in directly to one another. So the budget for 22-23 starting in April of 22, which that annual plan supports, is based on a level appropriation here from the EPF of 2.675 million. Perhaps the EPF will go up and perhaps that would go up. That would be beneficial, but at this point, we're hoping to make sure that it remains level. So taking a look here, not a whole lot of changes, but if you remember when we modified the budget in September, we had to add $483,000 from the rollover funds from our last 5-year contract from the EPF that were unspent. A lot of it was due to COVID, but it was also unspent funds in the years prior. We put that in the budget as a placeholder because it was recommended that we do so. And I indicated, and based on discussions with the audit committee, it was determined that we would not spend that money this fiscal year because we didn't have enough time to plan for it. In this budget here in 22-23, we are spending $240,000 of that. $60,000 of it is spread throughout the entire budget. But the very specific items include right here, that $100,000 is specifically for habitat restoration work. And then down here at the bottom, under capital expenditures, this $80,000 is specifically for capital improvement projects, one of which is the grounds project, which I described in the annual plan, and then also EV chargers, electric vehicle chargers here at the Discovery Center, and potentially at 1 or 2 different trailheads, which we're still trying to figure out. But that would be subsidized probably at, I would guess, close to 70%. So we would pay maybe 30%. Overall, the changes in the budget overall are minimal in all the lines. But again, the important thing to know is we're applying $100,000 directly from that 483, that rollover that was unspent this year, right into habitat work, which is habitat restoration, which includes invasives control and mowing, which gets us prepared for to be able to burn. And that's kind of a quick overview. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's talk about staff too. Staff salaries here. Staff salaries include a 2% increase, and that depends on the governor's action. If she approves an increase for management confidential employees, we would follow suit. It includes 42% for benefits, and it also includes 15 seasonals, which is about normal for us, but at an increased rate of $15 an hour, because currently it's $13. And the minimum wage goes up at the end of this month to $13.20. So that's kind of the highlights. Any questions on that? And I can jump into the 5-year, and then you can ask any questions on the overall. Okay. Let's see. So this is the 5-year. We call it the 5-year Paris budget. This is what Lisa and I have to submit at the end of this month. And this is one of the reasons that we do our budgeting now instead of March for the upcoming fiscal year. There's a number of assumptions that are built into this that roll across the board. So services, which is program revenue and Discovery Center revenue, is flat across the board. Rental, lease revenue is flat across the board, making the assumption that we have tenants going forward, which we hope we do. We've talked about this before. Investment earnings, we have to put in some numbers. So we put in $50,000, which comes out here as the annual expense. That's basically what the expense we pay Key Private Bank. So it's a wash. You can see what the actual income was last year from our audited financials was almost 1.1 million. But we, instead of making assumptions, because you never know, we put in 50. Salaries and wages, again, based on a 2% increase. Other employee benefits based on a 42% benefit rate and $820,000 for Opeb. And I think that's probably the general highlights. So if you go down here, this is the budget that we just talked about. These are the ones going forward, 24, 25, 26. It shows a negative balance, but that, of course, includes these numbers here, which is depreciation and the $820,000 in OPEB, those are non-cash. So if you take those numbers out, you have a slight surplus. So the surplus here was 587. Next year is like 3,400. The following year is like $880. So there's actually a very slight surplus. This is kind of confusing to follow, but this is the format we have to use for Paris. But again, like Lisa mentioned when she was going through the income statement, these numbers tie right back into, this ties into our audited financials for 21. And these tie into the income statement and these budgets here, or the bottom line of our budgets here. Folks have questions I can answer? Oh, wait a second. I'm sorry. Again, I missed one important thing. I left my notes at home this morning. So this is an important thing to note too. Mitigation fees. This is landfill mitigation. Currently, we have it budgeted at $150,000. We brought it down to 120 because the quarterly payments have continued to drop somewhat modestly. 120 might be a little low, but I think it's important to keep to knock it back that far. So if we do actually get a little more, that's fine, and we can expend those funds. But based on the last quarterly payment, which was around 33,000, Lisa, 33.7, I think, we decided to knock that down a little bit too. Sorry.
And Chris, in our audit committee meeting, we talked about contribution to OPEB at, was it 4% as opposed to 3%, given the performance of our investments?
Oh, when we'll get to that, to transfer to the endowment.
Yep.
That's next up on the next action item.
Yep.
All right. In terms of, I mean, not to put words in your mouth, but I with the summary that you gave and Lisa gave, I take it there's no threats to the business on the financial side, at least looking forward, that we're aware of. It looks good.
No, it looks good. And you know, you've heard this time and again, how fortunate we were going through COVID and actually getting our funding last year, and then actually trying to put together a new 5-year contract. And we have that in place. That's some of the most critical things that we could have gotten done, and we got it done.
Yep.
Not patting ourselves on the back. The stars aligned. So yeah, we're in good shape. We're in good financial shape.
That's great.
Hey, Chris, can you remind me, how are the mitigation fees? How does the landfill come up with them? Are they a function of tipping fees or something else?
Yeah, it's based on it's a fee per ton.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's $2.50 a ton, $2.50 a ton, and it's based. That's specifically in the Part 360 permit that DEC issued. It's one of the
special.
Well, thank you. It's a special condition. Yeah. I mean, and the reason that the numbers are going down is because simply the city's taking very little outside trash. And most of the trash that's going in is their own. So they're to be able to extend the life of that landfill. So they have a place to put their trash, which is understandable.
Chris, how long has this been a line item for us?
As long as I've been here.
20, yeah, I'm thinking 20 years at least, right?
Oh yeah, it hasn't been this high, but yeah, I mean, over 30 years. It's always been a stipulation. It's never been as high as this. $2 a ton, not $2.50 a ton. It's $2 a ton.
Gotcha.
Patty just corrected me.
Go, Patty.
Yes, she's the one who processes. She's the one who processes and takes the numbers and crunches them to make sure that the city's actually giving us accurate numbers. So at some point, this is going to go away. And we've talked about that before. At one point, John, you remember when this was close to $500,000 a year.
Yeah.
Any other questions I can answer? Okay.
And we have a motion to approve the proposed resolution approving the operating budget for fiscal year 22 to 23 and the proposed 5-year Paris budget projections.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Peter, John and Peter, thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. Next up is the proposed transfer of funds from the endowment to the Opeb account that John mentioned. So it looks like the proposed resolution contemplates 3 various percentages. And Chris, I understand this is, we're looking at this based on the favorable performance of the fund last year. I think it was a 9% annualized rate of gain, but I'll turn it to you.
Sure. So here's kind of the summary that Lisa puts together for us. Here's the value of the endowment at the end of the fiscal years. So here's the total, and then there's the average balance, which is 3.647, and what 5, 4, or 3% would be as from a cash standpoint. And it was determined when we went through the exercise of evaluating and looking at OPEB and how we fund that. We created that OPEB reserve account and decided that the board would make a determination on an annual basis of how much to transfer from the endowment, if it had good positive performance, and put that into the reserves to continue to fund that. So the audit committee had this discussion Friday of last week and determined 5%, I believe, because of the high performance this year. It's probably unlikely that it would be 5% next year, but it is a year-by-year thing. Does that sound right, audit committee members?
Yes, that was our discussion, and it seems like based on how well it performed this past year, it would seem as though the 5% would be well justified for this year. And then, of course, we could reevaluate for next year based on the upcoming year's performance.
Okay. So this resolution would direct me to work with Key Private to have them transfer 5% with this, what's the number is $182,381.46 to the OPEB reserve account prior to the end of the fiscal year.
And that would not cause any sort of threat to immediately available cash or operations or any other concerns regarding day-to-day?
No, not at all. No, no, short answer.
Any questions or comments on this action item? Then can we get a motion to approve the proposed resolution as drafted, with the understanding that Chris will coordinate with Key Private to look at transferring the 5%?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
Your contract, and I'm kicking it to you, Chris.
Okay. So this is a multi-year vendor contract. I think you see these almost every board meeting. Anytime we have a multi-year contract, the board needs to approve it. And I would say, Tony, I think we need the word the commission approves and ratifies. Does that sound correct?
Correct. Yep.
So the minutes just need to reflect that. So this is the board approves and ratifies a 3-year contract for Northeast Network Solutions. They're our managed IT services. They're the folks that keep us running. The contract is attached and it began November 1st. That's why it's approving and ratifying because we did an RFP and that was the start date. So the start date, and that's when our other services ran out. So it runs from November 1st through October 31st of 24. And not to be presumptuous, if the board didn't approve this, it would be a 1-year contract. So, and if you're curious, the monthly fee is $18.65 a month. And this is what it pays for, which is actually pretty reasonable compared to other quotes that we got. Very reasonable. Any questions I can answer on that?
I will move to approve and ratify this contract.
I'll second.
Thanks. Tony, Elaine, thank you.
Any opposed? All right, thank you all. Next up, we have this real property acquisition matter. Chris, a little bit of background on this?
Yep, I'll give you some background on this. So this is a piece of property. It's a little over 15 acres that was not on the market, but we found that the property owner was going to put it on the market. So I had a conversation with a representative of the owners, and they said they were indeed interested in a sale. So I said I would move forward with an appraisal and I would move forward with board approval. So this is kind of the close-up. It's kind of hard to see my cursor. That red area. So the green areas are areas that are protected right now. And here's a little better perspective for you. So out here, here's the 15-acre parcel. This property, and this property are now recently owned by the town of Colony as part of a development project here. That's over 40 acres that were set aside by the developer, much of which is wet and not developable from a standpoint of a residential development, but certainly valuable from a habitat standpoint. So this would add right to that. So I have an appraiser that could start at the end of January, and that's the earliest. Most of these appraisers are 3 to 6 months out, as you probably can imagine. So directs me to acquire the property based on fair market value, up to fair market value, using money out of the reserve account. So this would be the third property that we purchased on our own, holding title, following the same process, following our land acquisition policy, and working with our attorney to do, getting title insurance and everything else that's required. I've already done an environmental review on a phase 1 environmental review, and it's clean. Any questions I can answer?
Chris, is this also a non-developable property, or is it?
No, it is. I wish you could see my cursor here, Steve. You can't see it very well. The corner to the east, that's wet. I would say maybe less than 20, probably 20% of this property is wet. Most of it's upland. It's oak and white pine and pitch pine. Access is a little strange because you need an easement, but there's already a road, a driveway that comes off of Cordell up here and goes down to a cell phone tower here. So that easement exists. So the appraiser would incorporate that. It's it's kind of an odd project for if you wanted to put a house there or an industrial building, because of the access is it's a driveway. Would work for a house, but works good for the Pine Bush Commission though. So any other questions I can answer on that?
Hey, Chris, in the big picture sense, I know it depends upon market forces and all that kind of thing. But after this acquisition, how many acres are out there that the Pine Bush could eventually assume? Is there 100 acres, 200 acres? What's your sense?
Over 2,000.
2,000.
2,000.
Okay.
There's over 2,000. So this can give you it might give you a little perspective, John. If you look, basically, if you look at, I don't know if you can see my cursor, you can see what's protected here. See all these open space areas that are undeveloped, all this stuff, all the way up to the county border. These are all undeveloped and all recommended for protection. None of which are for sale. And even the ones that seemed easy to get somebody to talk about, people don't even respond. So it's an opportunistic kind of thing.
So there's 2,000 that's out there, and of that, given what you just said, I mean, in the future, will we be thinking of the Pine Bush? I know this might take 20 years, but will we be thinking of the Pine Bush as 5,000 acres then?
That's the goal. It's almost it's almost 5,400 is the goal.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Great. Thank you.
Remember our tagline? It's not done yet.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. There's a lot of land out there.
It looks like there's a small, like a sliver of a corridor to the northeast of the proposed parcel. Is that a transmission easement?
It is. It's an old telephone line. It's visible on the ground, but there's really nothing there.
Any ballpark sense of what market value might be, or should we just wait for the appraisal?
I can tell you that, and you can look it up, anybody can look it up. It's assessed at 30,000, which seems like a reasonable, if it were to appraise at 30,000, which it might not, how fair market value and assessed value can be very different. But if an appraisal were to come in close to 30,000, that would be very reasonable for a 15-acre parcel, $2,000 an acre, with only 20% of it being wet. Wetlands, even wetland areas we've purchased anywhere between $3,000 and $4,000 an acre over the years, depending on market. I say we, our partners, before we could buy land.
Hey, Chris, can you remind me how much money is in the account that you propose to use for this acquisition, and how that account gets populated?
Yep. I'm gonna scroll up really fast here so we can look at it. So this is the reserve fund. So currently the reserve fund is showing 3.954. So it's about $4 million. A lot of that came over from when we separated from the Nature Conservancy. We had this land account where we would get mitigation fees, or if we had excess. When we were getting a lot of money from the landfill, when I mentioned we were getting like $500,000 a year, we weren't expending all those funds. So we would put it in the reserve so we could use it for land, or we could support ourselves if we didn't get the EPF funding for a year or something like that. But with interest over the last 10 plus years, it's really increased quite a bit. So we have a pretty good reserve account that we could use to acquire land. We just got to have land available to buy, or land that's reasonably priced. There's very few properties out there for sale right now. One I can comes to mind quickly. Top quality piece of land. The person's had it on the market with a hand painted sign for close to a decade wants at least 50% more than what it's worth, at least, if not 60%. So, you can't even spend the money on appraisal because you throw your money away. You get the appraisal and the person would say, well, I'm not going to take that. So long answer.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions on Cordell Road? No.
All right. So this proposed resolution, it proposes to direct you, Chris, to pursue this acquisition for the 15.1 acre property using the reserve account up to fair market value, which remains to be finalized. Unless there are any other questions or comments, can we have a motion to approve this resolution?
So moved.
Steve.
Second.
Jess.
Thank you. In favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, thank you all.
I will report on this in the March meeting. I don't know how far along we'll be, but I'll give you an update certainly on where we are. Thank you. Oh.
Most importantly.
This is a good one. And supervisor's here, I believe.
Yes.
Yes.
Here, yeah.
There's Supervisor Mahan. Probably signing all kinds of things as she's trying to get out of office here.
So the proposed resolution is, be it resolved that the Albany Pine Bush Preserve Commission honorably recognizes and thanks Paula A. Mahan as an ex officio member of the Board of Directors serving from 2007 through 2021, which includes the dedication of 6 properties totaling 157 acres from the town of Colony to the Albany Pine Bush Preserve. Can I have a motion to approve? I will make that motion.
And I'll second that motion.
And all are in favor.
Thank you. And I will say that 157 acres under Paula's reign and with Mr. McGuire there in the Economic Development Planning Department, the additional 40 acres brings it closer to 200 acres, even if it's not officially dedicated. And I want to share this one picture, Paula, and thank you for all the help that you've provided to the Pine Bush and to me over the last 14 years. I figured you'd get a kick out of this. So this was October of 2008 when we did the ribbon cutting for phase 3 of the Discovery Center, which were the grounds. And this is the plaque in the back of the Discovery Center recognizing Dr. Meg Stewart, who is one of the founding members of the commission and appointed citizen members of the commission board. Here's Elaine. Hi, Elaine. Katie Dolan, who was with the Nature Conservancy then. Pete Granis, who was in the assembly and then at that point was the commissioner of DEC. Supervisor Mahan, Bob Riley, who was with the assembly. Mayor Jennings, who was with the city. Ron Canistrari, who was in the assembly, and Jack McNamee, and who was in the assembly. And there's me, a little younger.
Who's that young man to the right? Yeah.
That's my younger brother.
I like that picture. It makes me look younger. Thank you.
Yes.
I've enjoyed the last 14 years. Thank you guys so much. It's been an honor to be part of the commission, and moving forward, I wish everyone all the best. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Paula. And thank you. Paula was kind enough to set up a meeting with incoming supervisor-elect Peter Crummy. We met about 2 weeks ago for a little over an hour in town hall to talk about the Pine Bush Commission and some of the intricacies that are involved as an ex officio and what you have to do and some of the more fun things. So Paula, thank you for that too.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. I will go back to the agenda. Tony. There we go. So we have Steve Campbell, our conservation biologist. He is going to talk about Carner Blue monitoring for 2021. This is a typo. That's my fault. 2020. He's going to talk about 2021. So with that, Steve, I'll let you take it over.
Okay. All right. Oop. Okay. All right, well, thanks, Chris. Before I get started, I just wanted to say that I'm the one presenting, but this is very much a collaborative effort. I especially wanted to acknowledge Dylan and Neil for their contributions to what I'm going to present. So I just wanted to start with just a few quick reminders to you about the Carner Blue ecology that will be relevant for the rest of the presentation. First, this is a species that occurs in oak savannas and pine barrens ecosystems. So they like open vegetation conditions, like you can see here. So there's relatively few trees in the canopy, and then there's a mix of shrubs and grasses and other herbaceous species in the understory. Second, remember that larvae feed only on lupin. So that's a critical component of the species habitat. So without lupin, there's going to be no Carner Blues. And then third, remember that the Carner Blues have 2 generations per year. So they overwinter in the egg stage. In the spring, they hatch out in early May. The larvae feed on lupin, they grow, they pupate. And then the first brood of adults begins to emerge in mid to late May. They live 3 to 5 days. During that time, they mate, they lay eggs. Those eggs then develop and hatch. The larvae then feed on lupin again. They grow, they pupate, and the second brood of adults emerge around July. Those adults then mate and lay eggs that overwinter. So that completes the annual life cycle of the species. So there's 2 generations of adults per year. The Carner Blue is an endangered species at both the state and the federal levels. And the threats to the Carner Blue are really the same that affect most threatened endangered species. Much of its habitat has been destroyed and replaced with human development. Here are a couple of local examples that you probably recognize. Here's Crossgate Mall up here and University of Albany down here. Habitat fragmentation usually accompanies habitat loss. Habitat fragmentation makes it difficult for individuals to move among habitat patches. And so for the Carner Blue, even landscape features such as roads and forest strips can act as fragmenting features. Habitat degradation is also a problem. Decades of fire suppression in the pine bush has degraded habitat. Without fire to periodically burn these areas, many of these areas have become overgrown with shrubs or trees, and those lead to conditions that are not suitable for the Carner Blue. Invasive species, especially invasive plants, also degrade habitat for the Carner Blue. They can shade out lupin and other understory plants needed by the Carners, as can be seen here by honeysuckle taking over the understory, or they can completely alter the vegetation structure and composition into something that's completely unsuitable, like a forest, which is in the case of a black locust stand that you can see here. And then over the long term, we expect climate change to pose a threat to the species across its range. So we're dealing with these threats in various ways. In particular, we're dealing with the threats due to habitat loss and fragmentation by protecting land. I'm sure, as Chris just mentioned, you're all aware of our ongoing efforts to acquire land as it becomes available. That's really important because adding land increases the size of the preserve, which then can support larger populations of Carners. But adding land also increases the connectivity of the preserve, which then reduces fragmentation and makes it easier for Carners to move among different parts of the preserve. We're dealing with habitat degradation through habitat management. Here's sort of our recipe for making barrens. We take communities that have been altered by fire suppression and invasive species, and then we use a combination of mechanical, chemical, and fire management to get communities that will support Carner Blues, such as successional northern sandplain grasslands and pitch pine scrub oak barrens. And then also, once these sites have been restored, we also use the same mechanical, chemical, and fire methods to maintain these in their condition. And this is clearly an oversimplification here. This is meant more to summarize than it is to downplay the amount of work involved in doing this. Joel, Jesse, and Tyler do a lot of important work to get us from here over to here and then to keep us here. So when we restore these areas, we need to make sure there are abundant lupin populations. So we seed lupin into these restored areas, as well as other nectar and native grasses. And this just shows you how much we have planted. When the preserve was established in 1988, there were only about 4 hectares of lupin remaining. So I don't know if you can see them. It just goes to show you how little there were. These little pink spots on the map was where the remnant patches of lupin were. We've since then, we've planted lupin and other native species into 290 hectares, over 290 hectares. So we've expanded the distribution and abundance of lupin and other nectar species considerably throughout the preserve. And then once we restore these patches of habitat, the butterflies don't show up to them, or at least not right away, especially when those patches are isolated from other patches. So we help the Karner populations get to these patches. We accelerate the colonization of those patches through captive rearing and release. So starting in 2008, we collected gravid females, and then we took those females and provided them to the New Hampshire Department of Fish and Game. They reared the eggs and larvae, and then they would give us back the pupae. And when the pupae were ready to eclose, we'd put them in these tents with a nectar source. And then soon after they emerged, usually on the same day that they emerged, we would release them into the restored sites. And so this map shows you the release sites. So we've released over 8,000 butterflies in 28 different patches. Most recently this year, we released butterflies into the newly restored area that we call Zebra up here in the upper left-hand corner. All right, so that should give you some idea about our efforts to recover the butterflies. But to determine the effectiveness of these efforts, we want to know how our recovery efforts are affecting population size. In particular, we want to know how is the population size doing in terms of state and federal recovery criteria. And for the state and federal recovery criteria, we're looking for more than 3,000 first or second brood adults in 4 out of 5 consecutive years. We also want to know how our population is spatially distributed, because part of the recovery criteria is that the populations are distributed among at least 5 subpopulations. So to answer these questions, we've been monitoring abundance since 2007 using distance sampling methodology. This slide just shows you where we monitor Karner blue populations in the preserve. The blue patches are our survey sites, which is really just a subset of all the restored areas that are likely to contain butterflies. Each of these sites is covered with a series of transects that the field techs walk along and count butterflies. And a single survey consists of our field techs walking all the transects at all the sites on the same day. So that's just one survey. And then field techs conduct nearly 30 surveys throughout the spring and the summer of each year. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that we have many surveys across both the first and the second brood. And we estimate brood size using a 2-step process. We start with the raw counts from the surveys, and then using the methods of distance sampling, we adjust those counts for imperfect detection to get an abundance estimate for each of those surveys. And then for the second step, we fit an insect emergence curve to those abundances. And I do that using Bayesian methods. And there are several biologically meaningful parameters that control the shape of this curve. And one of those in particular that we're interested in is brood size. So the best fitting curve to these data then give us our best estimate of brood size. And remember, brood size is the cumulative number of individuals that emerged over this entire period. So remember, the individuals only live for maybe up to 5 days. So the population is constantly turning over during this time. And so the challenge here is to estimate how many individuals have emerged over this entire period. That's the brood size estimate that we're after. Okay, so that glosses over a lot of details, but that's just to give you a general idea of our approach. So let's look at how the butterflies are doing by looking, we'll look at all the brood sizes for all the different survey sites combined. So the first thing I want you to notice here is the amount of area that we surveyed over time has increased. As we've restored pine barrens and then released butterflies into those areas, we would incorporate those areas into our surveys. So this just shows you how much survey effort we've put in over time. Now let's overlay the brood sizes. You can see that since we started counting butterflies, the number of butterflies has increased from a few hundred individuals in both broods in 2007 to a second brood that fluctuates regularly between 10 and 20,000 in most years. And remember that the state and federal recovery criteria for our population is 3,000. So in 2013, the second brood exceeded that threshold for the first time, and then we've been over that threshold ever since. So overall, I think looking at this graph, it looks like our recovery efforts appear to be working. Also keep in mind that these abundance estimates are based just on our survey sites. So just these areas in blue. There are butterflies in nearly all the sites where there are lupin, which is what's shown in green. We can't possibly survey all those sites. So the estimates I showed you are very conservative. There are many more butterflies out there than the estimates based just on our survey sites. And the butterflies are not equally distributed across the preserve. To give you some idea of the relative contribution of the different areas, we grouped restored areas into subpopulations. And the groupings were based primarily on the proximity of restored areas. So in general, if areas were within 200 meters of one another, they were considered to be the same subpopulation unless they were divided by a geographic barrier such as a road. And here are the relative contributions of the different subpopulations to the second brood in each year. The takeaway from this slide is that over time, we've increased the spatial distribution of the population from a few subpopulations early on to now where we regularly have measurable subpopulations in 6 of our 8 subpopulations. And we've also increased the density of most subpopulations, as can be seen here for the second brood. Populations went a little bit bonkers here in 2020, so it compacts the trends from previous years, but you can still see that the densities increased in many of the subpopulations starting around 2013 compared to what they were prior to that. So I would say based on the increases in population size, the successful establishment of multiple subpopulations, and the increases in density that you can see here, we know what we're doing is working generally. But determining why it is working is a bit more complicated. We know we're putting a lot of the pieces in place in terms of lupin, vegetation structure, nectar species, and disturbance. But I would say we're still figuring out the right amounts and the timing of it all. And on top of that, there's the randomness of weather that affects the populations as well. So to see what I mean about how it's a bit more complicated, I'll just look at a few of the sites and show you how they responded to our management. But before I show you how the butterflies responded to management, keep in mind that the native vegetation in this system is very resilient. And just to give you an idea, here's a series of photos taken over the course of 2 weeks after a burn. So starting on June 9th. You can see how quickly it bounces back. Again, that was just over 2 weeks, so you have that much growth. So the vegetation recovers very quickly in response to our management. And so the butterfly then responses to these structural changes in vegetation also tend to be very quick, and also they tend to be ephemeral. So now let's look at some of the individual sites. Let's start with a site named Alleycat. Here you can see we saw a temporary increase in densities following mowing and burning in 2013. And here you can see a very large increase following only mowing in 2020. And then the density was a little bit lower following a burn here in 2021. We see similar dynamics here in Andromeda. We see a temporary increase in density following mowing in 2013, and then following mowing and burning in 2017 and 2018. However, notice the big increase that we saw here in 2020 in Andromeda was not directly in response to management. So this likely implies that this big bump that we saw here in 2020 in Alleycat was probably at least in part due to favorable weather. We see some of the same dynamics at the site named Bivy. You can see we saw a big increase in density following only mowing in 2020. Or so the mowing was in 2019, and then we saw a big increase in 2020. But again, notice the big increase we saw in firebrand in 2020 was not directly in response to management. So again, this likely implies that some of this big bump was due to favorable weather. Also notice that the management we did in Bivy in 2013 and 2014 didn't necessarily lead to much of an increase in density. So management doesn't always result in increases. And let's just take a look at 2 more sites. At Antelope South Asphalt, we saw an increase in density following mowing in 2013 and in 2020. and an increase following a burn in 2017. Now compare that to Chubb Field where we burned, and densities decreased following each burn. So sometimes our management may increase their numbers and sometimes it may not. Also notice that neither of these sites in 2020 showed those really big increases that we saw at other sites. So also not all sites seem to be equally affected by favorable weather conditions. So it seems that the sites seem to be unique in terms of the response to management, which is interesting from an ecological perspective, but it's challenging from a management perspective because it means there's a lot more factors aside from just time since management in determining population response. So our challenge moving forward is to make sense of these factors. An important piece of the puzzle is understanding the effects of our management is having on habitat. So to this end, we've been monitoring habitat at 7 sites. You can see here, we've been doing this since 2017. Here's the list of the habitat features that we're measuring at each of the sites. And here, just to show you what some of those data are starting to look like. This is just some of those data from a single site. I still need to update these graphs for 2020 and 2021. But you can see that we're starting to get a time series of habitat measurements at these sites. And once we start to get these habitat measurements, we can start to relate those to the Karner densities at those sites. And then by exploring those relationships, we can hopefully start to better understand the mechanisms that are driving the population responses to management, and then use that understanding to hopefully better manage our populations. Environmental variables are also likely to play a role, especially as we saw last year. So we're also going to need to consider things like temperature and rainfall. We should be able to get these data from our weather station. Snowpack in winter is also likely to be important for protecting overwintering eggs. And we can hopefully extract some of those data from our community science snowpack monitoring program. And then looking forward, something else we need to start thinking about is the effects of climate change. The local climate is definitely changing. Here is just one metric to show that. These are data from the Albany airport, and it shows the average daily minimum temperature is increasing across all 4 seasons. So again, that's just one particular metric. But if we look at this more broadly across the species range, the climate envelope for this species is expected to shift north. Models are forecasting that by 2080, the species will essentially be extirpated from its current range with the exception of probably small parts of Wisconsin. So we need to start thinking about, this is all we're looking forward. We need to start thinking about how climate change is going to affect our management. We'll be looking at things like, can we utilize our microclimate variation created by the sand dunes? For example, north-facing slopes and frost pockets may help us delay the effects of climate change. We might need to consider things like assisted migration as a way to help the species shift its range northward. The Karner blue is well positioned for that type of action because we already have protocols for captive rearing and release. We're likely going to have to review the processes and methods that we use to achieve our conservation objectives. In particular, climate change could alter the effectiveness of management the effectiveness of fire as a management tool. So we're going to have to think about that moving forward. And then something else we might need to think about is shifting. Currently, our primary management goal is really about restoring the pine bush to its historical conditions. But as climate changes, we're probably very likely going to have to shift our management goals to adjust to climate change. Okay, so then just to wrap this up, I just wanted to remind you that on the whole, our management appears to be working. We've seen that in the increase in population size from 2007 to where we are now, we've successfully established multiple subpopulations throughout the preserve, and we've maintained our population above the recovery thresholds for the last 9 years. So, however, as I mentioned, we still have much work to do in understanding the mechanistic relationship between management and population response. But I like to think that we bought ourselves some time to figure this out because currently the prospect of losing the population at the Albany Pine Bush Preserve is considerably less dire now than it was even just 10 years ago. So I think by boosting the abundance and distribution of the species, we've hopefully provided the species with a little bit of a buffer, a little bit of an edge as we head into the future. Okay, that's what I have. So if we have time now for questions, we can do that, or I'm not sure if we want to wait till the other presentations.
Oh, we can ask questions now. Folks have questions for Steve?
Steve, could you go back to those charts that show the average minimum temperature?
Yes.
And
lost it. Hold on. Try that again. There we are. See them?
No, we're still on last slide. There you go.
All right, I was just looking at this X and Y, 1940.
So this is over the last 80 years. This is your data that we got from the airport.
Huh.
So it looks like there's other metrics I had. So it looks like the maximum temperature isn't necessarily going up, but it looks like the floor of the floor is coming up. The ceiling seems sort of fixed. We're not necessarily getting hotter, but all the lower temperatures seem to be increasing.
Yeah, exactly.
And they also had some for precipitation. I think there's some indication that the precipitation might increase on average, but I think the variability is going to increase moving forward.
Other questions for Steve? No? All right. Okay. Well, if you think of them, you can go right to Steve directly, or you can come to me and I can get the questions to him, because you know I can't answer those questions.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
Really informative.
Okay. Next up, we have India Futterman. India is our science education specialist, and she will be talking to us about the Teen Science Cafe, which she oversees. And if you haven't met India, this is India.
Hi, everybody. Just want to make sure you can hear me okay.
We can.
Fantastic. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Make that, where am I? There we go. Thank you for that introduction, Chris. And just want to say, Steve, that was a great presentation. And conservation and stewardship are doing a fantastic job. And it's really great to be able to work closely with them. So yeah, my name's India Futterman, and one of several hats that I wear as science education specialist is the adult leader of the Albany Pine Bush chapter of Teen Science Cafe. Now, Teen Science Cafe is a national network of educational institutions such as libraries, university extension programs, museums, nature preserves, and nature centers like us. The goal of which is to connect local high school students and middle school students aged 13 to 18 to connect them with local professionals in the STEM industry. So that could be professors, people in biotech, any sort of scientist working in the area or science adjacent person. And what we do with this core group of teen leaders that I work with is the teens and myself work with these STEM professionals to plan and host monthly social events featuring this professional scientist who will share their work in a manner that is tailored to a teen audience, and will have some sort of interactive component in their presentation to engage the teens with what they do. It benefits the teen leaders not only by really empowering them in this leadership position, but it also exposes them to the science that is happening right here and right now in their local area, and exposes them to different career options that they might have. So it's kind of a multi-pronged, multi-beneficial program that we have going on. So since I've been here, which has been only in COVID times, I've only been at the Pine Bush for just over a year, we've only been able to do virtual programs. But that said, I'm really pleased with all that we've been able to accomplish simply over Zoom. So that's why I'm calling this the virtual Teen Science Cafe. And this map here shows where all of our teen leaders come from. So we've got a core group of 10 teens, from ages or from the, between 9th and 12th grade, and from 6 different high schools. So we have a pretty far reach, which is great. So that green star in the middle is us. And then we've got students as far away as Burnt Hills and as all the way down to Columbia High School. So mostly public schools. We've got a student from Doane Stewart, which, as you know, is a private school, but yeah, a really great diverse group. So I just want to share the 2 events that we were able to host this semester. And what you'll notice is that the content and the scientists that we had as guests really don't have that much to do with the Albany Pine Bush and what we do here. And that's okay. The goal really in Teen Science Cafe is to use the reputation and the name recognition of an institution as sort of a bridge between professional scientists and the teens. So when they hear, that the Albany Pine Bush is related, they're more inclined to participate in these events. So our first virtual event of the semester featured a wonderful assistant professor at Rensselaer Polytechnic, Dr. Raquel Velio. She is in the Science and Technology Studies department, and she gave a really fascinating presentation on infrastructure and accessibility. So that's her wheelhouse. That's what she works on, specifically wheelchair accessibility. And she gave us a whole rundown of the history of advocacy in accessibility, and also talking about the methods that she uses in her sociological research. And this was a pretty heady topic. She presented it in a way that was very engaging and accessible to teens. So she is a really great example of sort of a role model and sort of the new face of science today. She is from Brazil. She's a woman scientist. She had education internationally. So she offered this really fantastic perspective for our students. And being local, I think that was really impactful for the students to hear from her. So this was fantastic. We had about 15 participants. So because the events, as I mentioned, are geared toward teens, we reach out to primarily a teen audience to participate in these events. So yeah, we had pretty good attendance at this one. This was fabulous. And then our second event of the semester featured Dr. Valerie Rabson, who is an assistant professor of astronomy at SUNY Oneonta. And prior to that, her position was the director of the Dudley Observatory. So formerly she was much more local, and now she's slightly less local. But this is one of the benefits of having a virtual structure, right? We can have a guest from all the way from Oneonta who can come and be with us virtually without having to travel. It minimizes costs, and it just makes it easier for all of us. And she had this fantastic presentation about the history of the Hubble Space Telescope, and which has been in operation for 31 years, and they're phasing it out. But she gave us a rundown of the history of this observatory and how it relates to other observatories in NASA's space program. And we utilized a lot of cool features in Zoom to make this an interactive presentation. We were using the polling feature. She had a whole interactive game set up where students were challenged to interpret images taken by the Hubble Space Telescope. And that was a really great way that she made this interactive and still a virtual setting. So very pleased that we were able to snag these 2 folks to talk with our students, and the teens did a great job planning these events. And next on the docket for next month, we have Mr. Stephen Dodds, who is a senior architect with Finney Design Group. You may be familiar with them. That firm has been responsible for many recognizable buildings in the area, including 625 Broadway, the DEC headquarters. So that's really great that we get to speak with him, and he can share his experience as a LEED certified architect. So yeah, I'm happy to take any questions about this. This is just, teens can be a really tricky audience to reach, and I think this is a great way to bring them, to connect them to the Discovery Center and to the Albany Pine Bush.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Any questions for India?
What's the eligible age range for participants? Like how young?
That would be, 13 through 18, 13, all the teens.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everybody.
I have a question, India. That's
Sure.
fantastic, and it goes along with the kind of plans that we've had to try to figure out how we reach different age groups, including adults, but not just exclusively elementary age students. So that's great. In terms of like who attends, do you see a core group of students who regularly attend these things, or does each one have kind of a different mix, or how does that work?
That is a great question. So the subject matter of those two talks that I presented on that we had was very, very different. So we actually noticed that there was a much younger skewed audience for our astronomy talk because I think the subject is much more approachable for a younger audience. And for Dr. Velio's talk, that was definitely in the higher high school student range. That said, there are students who are hoping to get involved with Teen Science Cafe in the future who are regularly in attendance at events to see what goes into planning these events. So I really do hope to build this core group of returning attendees. And so that's definitely in the works for next semester, but that's a great question. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for India? No? Okay. I'm going to just share my screen just quickly before we go to Jackie, who's waiting there. I feel like we have a live broadcast, Jackie, waiting. Well, we actually do. So at the end of your board packet, we have a list of questions that follow a Discover the Pine Bush program, a virtual program. So Jackie Citroniti, our lead educator, is going to take us through a short version of the virtual Discover the Pine Bush program, like you would get as a student. And there's these discussion questions are provided either before or after the program. But Jackie will probably go through a couple of these, maybe all 10, probably not all 10. But we're going to get rid of that, and I'm going to turn it over to Jackie. There you are.
There we are. Can you hear me?
There you are. Yep.
There we are. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me today live here at the Albany Pine Bush Preserve. My name is Jackie. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the lead educator here and part of the education team. And what I wanted to bring to you today is just a little tiny snippet. I know Chris said there's a whole bunch of questions there, but I'm not going to even have enough time to probably do one or two. But just a little snippet of how we adapted our live in-person Discover the Pine Bush hike in order to accommodate even back when kids were still at home. One of the important parts, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get my screen here, but it's not going. Oh, well. One of the important parts is how I wanted to make sure that the kids could still see the pine bush live, even though they weren't here, and still have a real life person that they could see and interact with and ask questions, and still I could show them things rather than just do a presentation on the pine bush. So that's how this all got started. But before I go any further, I really want to thank the friends, because I wouldn't be doing any of this without their financial contribution. They provided the finances to purchase an iPad, which is what you're looking through today, the tripod, the data plan, which allows us to walk through the preserve, and this fascinating headset, which takes out all the noise so you can just hear my voice. That comes in handy, especially when I'm out here and my hair's blowing. Anyways, and I can still hear the students and they can still hear me. So Chris did mention those 10 questions. Those questions are sent via email to the teachers once they sign up for a specific date and time with me. I ask them to review them, but not have them out during the program, because I don't want students to be here like this. I want them to be watching and engaging while we're hiking and doing the program. I do answer them once I get up to the overlook. I will not be making you walk all the way to the overlook with me today, but I go through them and they answer them. So that's a way for me to evaluate, wow, they are engaged and they are listening and they know the answers that I went through for the last half an hour. It's about a 30 to 40 minute program. So if you wouldn't mind for just bearing with me and imagining, as I would tell the kids, put your imagination on, and if you would become a third or fourth grader for a few moments, I am just going to start talking as if I was teaching. I am going to be going up the trail. It does get a little shaky when I walk, but it clears up once I stop. And as I tell the students and the teacher and anyone, please, if you have any questions at any time, or maybe an I wonder, or this reminds me of, or any kind of question like that, which is what we want to provoke in the students, please feel free to ask anytime. So I'm standing here at our trailhead number 1, which is right behind our Discovery Center here at the Albany Pine Bush Preserve. We have over 12 trailheads and over 20 miles of trails that you can come and hike anytime, day or night. Our Discovery Center, which I am going to try and flip the screen here, is right in front of me, and you can see it right here. And that is open Thursdays to Sundays. That is also free. Come on down and bring your family once you have a chance to experience the Pine Bush here today. So we're going to head on up the Blue Loop. And like I said, it is going to be a little bumpy, but I want you to keep in mind when I'm walking, what's above me? You might notice the canopy, and I'm going to be using different science words that pull in the standards through curriculum, 3rd all the way through elementary. Also, maybe notice what's under my foot, because you'll notice that the soil and substrate changes as we walk on up the trail. The Albany Pine Bush Preserve is home to many different animal and plant species here. And I hope in our hike today that you'll get an idea of why this habitat is so rare, why it's so important for these plants and animals, and that we have to take care of it in order to protect it and save it. One is a special species in the preserve that we are trying to protect and take care of, is this rare inland buck moth. Now, normally I would go into the life cycle of it and any questions and talk about when it's out here and that they can come and visualize it and see it for themselves. Unfortunately, we don't have the time today. But all right, friends, let's head on back up the trail. You may notice the canopy. This is a very special tree here in the pine bush called the pitch pine. And once we get up here, you may notice that it's much more open and sunny. And this is what we call a pine barrens. A pine barrens is not a forest and it's not a field. It's a combination of both. We kind of call it like a young forest. And that's a combination of flowers and ferns and shrubs with just a few trees. But we have to take care of it and manage it. And this area right here was mowed just a few months ago, actually almost a year ago now. And we take care of it by mowing. And another way we take care of the preserve, which a lot of people are very surprised once they see this, is fire. At this point, I go into talking about fire, how it's important for this ecosystem, and how it helps to open up the landscape and improve the habitat for a lot of species. And then I show them, if I can get around here, we talk more about how the pitch pine, how the thick bark on the pitch pine protects the trees, how it also helps to open up, and believe it or not, a lot of students don't know what this is. And we talk about cones, what is in a cone, and how the fire helps to open cones, and how it's food for many animals. And I asked them to name maybe what animal might eat them as well. Then we head up the trail, and I asked them to really now start paying attention to what's underfoot. And we get up here to usually the soil. And this question always surprises me when I talk to students. I'll ask them, what does this look like? Where might you else you see this type of soil? And a lot of them just keep saying dirt, dirt, dirt. And and I have to usually give them a clue. You might find it at a beach. And then I usually pick it up. I don't do a full soil core, but I'll pick it up and I'll talk about the sandy soil and how it got here. And I go through and this happens all the time. People are walking on the trail. I actually have a sign on my thing that says, please do not disturb education program in progress. But I'm going to flip it around for right now. And then I usually go through the full geological history of the preserve and how it got here. And then I continue on up the trail for, the rest of to the overlook. Good morning. And we stop at any animal tracks we may see. We stop at some plant species that then talk about scrub oak or maybe some ferns that are out. And then we'll continue on the bird and animal tracks that we might find, or if I start to hear something, I will talk about that as well. I'm also telling them on the trail how if the bird nets are up, the different research we have here. Once I get to the overlook, I show them the data loggers and talk about the weather data that we're collecting 24/7. I also show them a whole panorama of the Helderberg Escarpment and talk about the sand dune. It's the largest sand dune here in the preserve, and it was cored by geologists. And then I end at the after all that and kind of go through the questions and ask about any other questions that they may have or thoughts. So I just really took a 30-minute and crammed it into a few minutes. So I hope that wasn't too fast. But I would really like to open that up for any questions that anybody might have about the program. Again, the point is to engage the students, showing them things, asking them questions and getting them to find the answers. So while they might not be here in person doing that with me, they really do engage on virtually. And just to give you an idea, in 2019, the last time we were doing this program live from February to June, we had about 235 students here in person. And then virtually it was double that in 2020. So even though it is more difficult to sit and look at a screen and talk to students, we were able to reach twice the amount of students than they would have if they were here live. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining me today. Please come on down to the Pine Bush and visit anytime, and I'll open it up for questions.
Thanks, Jackie.
Not a question, Jackie. Not a question, but we appreciate your energy. That's fantastic what you're doing.
Oh, thanks so much, John. I appreciate your feedback.
So here's just an example of like how staff, everybody uses the same word during COVID. Everybody had to pivot. That's a really trite term, but like if you're an educator like Jackie lives and breathes environmental education. That's what she does really, really well and has for a long time with us. And usually, environmental ed begins with sometimes some discussion in the classroom and then going outside. And, we had a situation where you could just do virtual programming inside. And Jackie took it above and beyond to do programs outside. And like she said, thanks to the friends that funded the tech support here, you're able to get an outdoor experience, even if it's virtual. So.
And Chris, we spoke before about diversity, including those who are disabled. And I got to imagine that there's people that can't get out there. And this, if word can get to them, that this is a pretty good deal. Yep. I think it's great.
Yeah, a lot of our classes, both in the fall this year and in the spring last year, really encompassed several inner city Schenectady elementary schools that we had not even had before at all. And they jumped right on it again this fall. And I went through and did programming with all of them in the fall too. So they came back. That was Pleasantville Elementary in Schenectady. And so we hope to do another push for this coming spring, to reach even more inner city students.
That's great.
All right, I will sign out and thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time today, unless there's any other questions.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful holiday.
You too.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, the things that we can do with technology.
Yeah.
Which is good. So that brings us to the end. For any other business, Tony, any other business?
I'm here.
Board members, any other business? Okay. Next meeting is March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, 2022. Supervisor Mahan, you're welcome to join us.
Thank you.
And I think that's all we've got.
And can we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
Nancy.
And
I'll second.
John, second. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful holidays.
Good, safe holiday, everybody.
Tony, can you stay on for a minute?
Yes.
Okay. They can stay on, doesn't make any difference.
Are we, it's still recording, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Wendy, can you stop it from recording?